Okay, so our next technique is going to be washes, and we're going to be using a series of AK interactive washes to do this model. Now, you can make your own washes. That is perfectly acceptable, provided you have the proper medium, thinning medium, and the proper paint. And what I mean by that is you can take any paint in your collection and thin it with either water or a mineral spirits or a paint thinner of some sort and make a wash out of it. Now, the important thing is we have dull coated this, so we are protecting the decals and all of the other painted on aspects of our car that we're not going to ruin them with this. Now, these are enamel washes, and they're a little bit more intense because they are enamel, so they're not as forgiving and they don't clean up as easy. So that's important to that's an important thing to note when you're working with these. So it's a pretty big step to go from pastels, which are basically completely reversible, to these enamel washes, which are not. Our first step here is I am working with naval weathering from AK Interactive. This is streaking grime for light gray ships. And obviously this is not a light gray ship we're working on, but it's not what it's for, it's what it looks like that we're going after here. And all I want to do is sort of highlight where the grime would be on this car, and in this case that grime is going to be hanging out at the ribs of this car. And I just want to get this on here. Now, you are going to note that it's kind of making some interesting patterns here with the brush stroke. Don't worry about what it's doing right now. I'm going to show you why that's not going to matter here in a minute. But let's get a little bit further into this here. And all I'm doing is letting this wash sort of flow over these ribs here, so kind of highlighting where the dirt would be sitting. And I want to be kind of careful how much of this I put on. You can paint whatever you want with this, and let the paint is going to find its, because it's a wash, it's going to find its own level, and it's eventually going to get down to it's going to get down into the grooves, which is what you want it to do. So just kind of let it do its own thing. Now, the nice thing is about these washes, you can help them do their own thing. And how you do that is using the thinner or mineral spirits, and basically washing over these areas and letting the wash sort of fade out. So I'm just sort of painting this here real quick, not being real careful with where it's going, just letting it fill in the gaps here, sort of weathering over everything. Hit this again. Okay. So that looks a little funky right now. It doesn't really look all that fantastic. But fear not, we are going to take care of that right now. So we're going to bring out AK Interactives. It's just a white spirit. It's a mineral spirit. It is a diluting thinner. And we're just going to kind of coat the model in this a little bit. And we're going to use it to take off most of what we just applied. But once again, I'm sticking to the up and down motion. And I'm just washing over to really thin out those details. Okay, now while our car is sort of soaking wet from this, this is where the fun of these washes kind of kicks in. I'm going to use the brush here, and I'm just going to move this enamel around. And because I have the car well coated, it's going to let me pretty much streak it wherever I want to. and move it into whatever pattern I'd like. So that sort of unrealistic look we had in the beginning, we're going to just work that right out. And if you find out that you've got too much paint or you don't like the pattern, just come in here with a Q-tip or a wet paper towel and take off as much of that color as you want to give it that look that you're going for. Now, if you did not properly dull coat this, you got to be very careful because you'll eventually that enamel, the mineral spirit will start wiping off the decals. It'll soften them up. So it's real good to make sure that you applied a healthy dose of the dull coat to protect all of your decals, because this will take it right off. Okay, so now that we've got that basic on there, I'm going to go on here with another color. This is just the streaking grime that I'm using. Starting at the top. Now, you've already got the mineral spirit on here, so it is already going to want to flow. So just sort of put it at the top and let it flow a little bit. Once again, we're going to use the same technique that we just did, and we're going to help it. We're going to help it down the car. Now, I'm just using the brush to kind of get it in the general area that I want, and then I'm just going to streak it down just like this. And I'm letting it streak. I want those streaks to show up because that's the look there, right? So that's what I want it to do. I'm going to come back in here with my Q-tip and just sort of tease it a little bit, kind of lightly. You can keep this process going on for quite a while by using the mineral spirits, but we're not going to keep it going on indefinitely here because we got other things to do. But I'm just going to take a brush here dipped in the mineral spirits, and I'm going to move this color around. You can see how it's starting to flow and move again. And we're just going to take this down. This technique obviously gives you a much heavier grime than the previous methods. So, you know, you got to look and see what you're modeling and how grimy you actually want it, and then choose your colors, you know, accordingly. And don't be afraid to get back in there and rework some of this with your Q-tip. That is one of the nicer features here, is that you get those very pronounced lines, but you can sort of soften them and blend them in a little bit. And I call this it's basically a wet method, because you're blending your colors on the model and you're just keeping it with enough mineral spirit to keep it flowing. And so now we're going to come in here, and I've got a rust color. And you don't have to wash over every layer. You can let the material find its own level and just see what it looks like. Sometimes it finds a nice level and it looks good, and you don't need to wipe it or mess around with it. You just sort of leave it where it's at. A lot of that will depend on how you place the material. Do you get it in a good location to leave it alone, or do you need to help it? So, whatever you choose, this is kind of a season to taste sort of thing. Unless you're looking off of an actual model that you're, a real picture you're trying to mimic, you can sort of just keep moving this stuff around to get it to where you want it. So this technique is a little bit more harrowing because it's very easy to add too much of something or not enough of something and then get something that looks totally disastrous. And as long as you keep it wet, you can sort of keep the colors moving and keep blending them. After a while, that technique sort of doesn't work as well because things will start to dry, and then it doesn't reactivate as well. So just keep in mind what you're doing and how much time you're spending on it because you don't want it to prematurely dry up on you. This is, like I said, this is a little bit of a heavier weathering than the last one. So if you don't like, if you don't like that much weathering, this probably is not the right technique, and it's just a lot more pronounced. So, all right, we're going to I'm going to clean this up here a little bit. I think I've got a little more weathering on here than I want, just by changing my Q-tips and keeping the material flowing. I can notice that I'm only working in one direction, and that's the direction that this grime would be sweeping over the car, and that's in a downward motion. Also note that we haven't really been focusing too much on rust details. I know that some of you folks are into adding your little rust spots. There's a reason we're skipping that for now, and we'll get to it, but we're not there yet. We're just doing some basic weathering at this point. All right, keep working it until you get it somewhere that you think, okay, that looks good, and then stop. Okay, now we got to do the same thing up on the roof. We want to repeat that process. So once again, we are sticking to the same principle. We're going to work down the center of the car, and you can see how that wash sort of fans out and finds its own way down the car. I'm keeping the bulk of the material in the center because that's where the bulk of the grime would start, and then I'm letting it work its way off to the sides. And I'm going to add in here a little bit of rust down the top as well. Yep, I'm letting it mix. Once again, keeping it wet. We're doing a wet mix here, so I want these colors to sort of blend together. We can control how they blend and how they mix, so that's not a problem. And now I'm just adding my mineral spirits to sort of coax the flow in a little bit. If you get it so wet to the point where it starts kind of moving off and dripping down the side, that can be a happy accident. Let it happen. See what results in it. I've found that a lot of time these washes, whether you're using acrylics or enamels, they'll do their own thing, and as they do their own thing, they make some pretty cool patterns. So kind of let that happen. I want it to be a little bit heavier on the roof of the car, so I'm not going to thin this out and move it around as much. I'm just going to keep adding material as I want to keep it moving about the car, but I don't want to thin it out too much here. So now that I've got that mineral spirits on the roof, these subsequent layers that I add are going to flow along it, and I'm just going to keep getting a nice little pattern here on the roof. Okay, I want this end panel to be a little bit. Feel free to leave it blotchy like this because it'll dry pretty much looking like that, where you've got you've got heavy grime in some places and not as heavy in others. So that's okay to let it do that if that's the look you're going for. And in this case, we do want this car to be a little bit more abused. So we're going to go ahead and just abuse it a little bit. I'm just going to add some clear rust in some areas. If you lay it on heavy, like I've done here, and you want that whatever resulting pattern it is, you're going to want to let this dry before you start moving the car around too much. Otherwise, it'll keep running, and then you won't get that look. So I'm pretty happy with the way this looks here right now, so we're going to leave this alone. Okay, so I kind of let the cat out of the bag here a little bit and mentioning oils, and previously we had not talked about doing anything with oils, but I think this is a more advanced technique that some of you are really going to want to try. And oils are awesome for weathering. So I'm using raw umber, Indian red, and burnt sienna. These are just some oils that I picked up at, I think, Michael's. And I have an appropriate thinner for this as well. So that's important, because this is where your car is if you use the variation of the technique that I showed you with the washes. But now what I want to do is I want to add some scratches into this car. So maybe the door's not riding quite right, and it scratched this car up a little bit. So I'm gonna just show this. I'm gonna put it all the way to the end of the track. So there's something up with this door, right? And this is just my raw umber. Okay. And the thing about oils is they dry very, 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 very slow. So once you start doing oils, it's going to take forever to dry. But the technique you get is really cool. So now I'm just coming over here with burnt sienna. And lastly, I'm going to touch it up with just a very small amount of Indian red. And if you're going to do Indian red, you should probably get that before they cancel it. So, all right. Now, got that paint in a nice line there. I'm going to take a very wide, stiff brush using just the bristles and a light amount of pressure. I'm going to go down in one direction, and I'm going to add my door damage. Okay, so I got a nice streak there. That is my damage from the door. Okay, now you can use the same technique and add some rust spots. So let's go and add some rust spots here on the door, and then maybe right up here in this corner. So I'm always going to start darkest to lightest. It's just going to be the way that you're going to want to go with it. That's how rust would appear naturally on the car, with your older rust, your darker rust down underneath, and then your newer rust on top. Now you can add, if you have like real fresh rust, you can add a yellow, like a very pale yellow. So in this case, I have a Naples yellow hue, and then an orange, which I have a cadmium orange hue. And that is like brand new rust, like it just happened kind of rust. But we're not going to get into any of that here right now. And now I'm going to put my brush in just a little bit of an oil thinner. And I just want to sort of dabble these together a little bit to get them to blend. And in this technique, you can get a very convincing sort of a rust spot. I'm just going to dab at this here. I've got a little bit more of a mix than I wanted, and I want it to sort of spot out a little bit. So you can see with the stiff brush that I'm getting like a little stipple effect that looks like little rust spots, and that is ideal. That is exactly what we're looking for here. So that adds a very aggressive technique to your car, but it is absolutely fantastic, and you can do it, in different patterns and in different directions. You can use it to sort of get that, that bullet hole look on your car, but it adds serious age to your car. So it is an aggressive technique, and it's good for roof too. So if you want to add a little bit to your darker roof panels, or maybe right around your roof ridge line here, you can certainly darken this up a little bit with this technique, and it does a really nice job. Now it takes a long time to dry. It takes a very long time to dry, so once you do this, you're just going to have to sort of set it off to the side. The wetter you make the paints with the thinner, the more of a blend you can get. But I find that this works better when you don't blend it as much and you let the individual colors sort of stand out on their own, because that's sort of how rust would look anyway. So the only place that I'm really going to blend is going to be right on the very ends um, of the color, right where it sort of meets the rest of the model. It's going to be the only place where I really want to blend it, because I want the paint to sort of have some volume to it. So this paint does get thick when you're working with it. You know, you can glop it on there pretty thick and have it raised, and it makes sort of a texture. And you know, I think that's really helpful in adding a full body look to your rust. I'm just gonna thin out these edges here a little bit. Try to blend this in a little bit better than it is. It's a little too straight lined. But once again, nothing in nature really is ever straight or perfect. So we sort of want to make this rust blend out just a little bit to sort of mix in with the surrounding model. And if you notice that you're picking up too much of one color, just clean your brush and then head back in, and you will get a very nice technique. Once again, this takes a long time to dry this way, so don't panic. It's gonna stay wet for, depending on how much you use and how much of the thinner you use, it can actually stay wet for a couple of days. In some cases that I've noticed. So it's just sort of a thing with the oils. All right, I'm going to thin this down. I think is about as much as I want to now. And I'm just going to got a little more of that Indian red on here than I wanted, and I'm just trying to clean that up a little bit. But okay, so that is a technique, and you can use that with whatever under technique you use. So whether it's powders, you can go over it. You know, once you seal, you could go in and you could add these rust marks. You can, you know, after you airbrush, you know, you can't get this kind of an effect from an airbrush. So you can go back and hit it with that again. Now this is a very aggressive, you know, that's a very aggressive painting. So, you know, when you look at these two cars, you know, side by side, you know, very different, right? Very different technique, very different look. You know, this is a very lightly weathered, you know, newer looking car. This is a holy shit, we beat the hell out of this thing looking car. So two different looks. You know, you got to choose which one is right for your railroad. Okay, back to the washes now here. I've got Earth Effects. It's an enamel color. It's a matte dark earth wash. And I'm going to go ahead and take the trucks, and I'm just going to hit them with this wash now, because we're washing this and we can control where the material is going for the most part. I don't bother masking off the insides. I'm just going to make sure that I don't get it into the wheel well there. And then we're going to go ahead and just get this wash all over here. And we do want to be careful that we don't miss the top of this, because it'll stand out, and the underside as well. Just make sure we got all that covered. The next thing that I want to do is I want to bring back our streaking grime color, and we're going to hit this up here a little bit and just put some streaking grime in. I'm going more for the colors than I am for any kind of fancy patterns or techniques on the trucks. They're just too small in end scale to draw on any kind of, you know, pattern. So some of the larger scales you might be able to put in some rust patterns and things like that, but in end scale our stuff is just too small Yep, I'm coming back in here while it's still wet, and I'm going to put this on here in some key locations, not the whole thing, just in a few locations, just like we did with the car itself. And I want to get some of this stuff to sort of mix into flow, and I'm using the wet mix approach, I guess, and just want to get this on here a little bit. And it's going to mix the way it wants to mix anyway. And then we're going to come back here with our mineral spirits just a tad and help it mix the rest of the way. I'm not going on nearly as heavy as I did with the car itself. It's just enough to sort of get it all to flow into the areas we want it to flow into. And, I actually want to get some of that out of there. It's sitting a little heavy in the spring areas. So I want to kind of keep a sort of a nice natural pattern on it. So I don't want the colors to blend completely together. I want them to retain some of their individuality. But by and large, we're just going to get a nice little mix there. All right, I'm going to come in here with my Q-tip and just sort of pull out some of the extra stuff. Just sort of sat a little heavy in the spring areas. So let's get that cleaned up just a tad. And there we go. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And we've already painted our wheels from the previous stage. So we're just going to sort of let this dry, put the wheels together, then reassemble the car.